What are the expectations? What is the agenda of this particular meeting? As especially there were some kind of escalation, at least verbal, and some concern within the last couple of weeks.
We are working now in this Minsk process since about 15 months or so, and it's perhaps important to give an indication regarding this process. There are four working groups: security, politics, economic issues, and humanitarian questions. And I'm the coordinator for humanitarian questions for OSCE. And it is clear that all these working groups have their specific needs and focus, of course. But independently of that, this process and the work of the humanitarian working group has to continue, has to go on, despite of progress, more or less progress in the other working groups. For the tomorrow's meeting, there is again, of course, the classic issue is, on one hand, it is detainees, it is missing persons, of course, the humanitarian needs and aid in general, but also particular questions as crossings at the contact line, and also a particular issue is the question of children and youngsters and young adults from the Donbas being now in Ukraine.
So in particular, are there really clear things to be solved in the very short period of time? You know, what is the goal set?
Well, the issues I have mentioned, these are the classic issues we are dealing with. There are, of course, more of that. And it is clear that, for instance, the question of the detainees, or the question also of the missing persons, are among the most burning questions. And it is absolutely important that additional and more progresses are made in these questions, because this will facilitate, of course, the cooperation and the exchange. It will contribute to a confidence building also among the involved parties, and of course, for humanitarian reasons and for psychological and human and also political reasons, it is important that in these two fields, not only there, but in these two fields, progresses are made.
When we're speaking about the detainees, how many, what are the approximate figures? Because when you hear the Ukrainian government, they said there are at least 107 people think that they are there at the territory which is not under control, while the DNR and our people say it's 45, and at the same time we hear another figure from their side. There is like 967 held on the Ukrainian territory, and Viktor Medvedchuk says it's around 600. So it's really very rough figures. But what we really know at this stage, during the discussions, are there any least and more clarity?
Yes, certainly we are discussing that practically in every occasion and in every meeting, and there are many lists, of course, since the very beginning, updated every 2 weeks, every month, with more details, with more questions, indications where people are, where people could be. But there are, of course, remaining a lot of contradictions. All the figures you are mentioning, they are possibly right and possibly not. And to go more in details, that is not changing the situation. But there are, of course, hundreds of people, detainees, there is no question. And it is an important issue, of course, always mentioned, according to the Minsk process and the Minsk agreements, that the formula all for all. And this is certainly the issue, and this is the aim, that at the final end of the discussion, all these detainees from both sides, from all involved parties, they are free. They are released and exchanged, and this is important. But the detailed figure, that is changing a bit practically every week, but in general, I confirm these lists and these figures.
You mean like 100, bit more than 100 from the Ukrainian side, which is claimed, and more than 900 from the side of the separatists? Because, like, what are the figures we should trust as citizens?
Well, this is not changing. Whether there are 50 or 70 or 90, this is not changing a lot. Whether there are 650 or 860, this is not changing a lot. The importance is that more or less these figures are correct, or they are possible and they are confirmed from both sides. And the important step is to release these people and to exchange these people and to free the detainees. Finished.
And why the prisoners swap like this doesn't happen for such a long time?
Well, there are certainly many reasons.
And what are the biggest obstacles at this point? Why,
Well, if you want to have a solution, there must always be a case fulfilled that all parties in the conflict are involved, that they agree to this kind of exchange to release the people. All parties must be involved and agree about. And this is from time to time has been possible in the past. Hundreds have been released in the past already before the Minsk process. During the Minsk process, many have been released, but there are still many remaining. So for the moment, this process is not yet finished, far from being finished, but we will certainly be working on it. And there are several reasons from both sides that not more progress has been made.
Maybe you give us a hint, because there is a huge concern, it doesn't happen at all, and it's even very hard to guess why, like what are the issues to be discussed in order the things make happen, the prisoner swap, in the
well, as I said, there must be a political understanding, the political will on both sides, and of course, as this is one of the conditions of the Minsk agreement, all for all, Ordo and Orlo, they asked for the release of all prisoners according to the principle of all now, or the sooner the better, and not do that in different steps. This is the condition, but actually this is not possible.
Are the people detained in Crimea and the people who are really currently in Russia, are their names there? Are they discussed within this process?
Well, we have also, of course, a detailed lists and names wherever these people are, but Crimea is not an issue of the Minsk process, and I'm not dealing with this issue of Crimea.
But these are the issues of also like Sentsov and Kolchenko and these people who are imprisoned.
Well, as I said, we are dealing with the detainees due to the conflict under the Minsk agreement, and Crimea and all these issues that this is not a part of the Minsk agreement and not the part discussed in these working groups in Minsk.
And have you been traveling to the separatist-controlled area during your last visit?
Yes, I have been visiting Ordo and Orlo 3 times, last year twice, and I have been there in July.
So what are the main findings and what is the situation, how much success you had also, and in Donetsk and in Lugansk?
Well, I must say that I know the situation fairly well, how conditions are. For me, it was important, having been there, having been in a position to see personally, to exchange with people, to exchange with authorities. I have been working in humanitarian issues for nearly 40 years now, and I'm not in a position that I have to see everything personally, but from time to time it is important to have this personal view, and that's what I was going to do during our trip. And what I have seen was corresponding about to what I expected, what I have seen before. It is clear that on one hand, being in Donetsk, in the city of Donetsk or Lugansk, You perhaps do not think that there is a war around, or let's say a conflict perhaps, not a war, but a conflict around on one hand. On the other hand, there are of course many needs. There are many people, hundreds of thousands of people, mainly the vulnerable, the most vulnerable, they are of course in humanitarian need. There are many needs to be covered, certainly. And there are many problems due to the lack of freedom of movement, for instance, due to the fact that they cannot easily cross the contact line and so on.
Have you managed to see the places where the people are detained are held?
That was not planned. During our trip, we have been visiting one of the detention centers on the government control side in the region of Kramatorsk. There we have been, and we have had the opportunity to talk with prisoners independently, bilaterally. That was a very good occasion. A detention center with hundreds of detained people. This was on the side of the government control. But on the other side, we have not had access. It was not planned, but I was talking to about 12 former detainees and prisoners, and with 3 mothers also of actual prisoners being prisoner now in a detention center in UA.
If you speak about the detention center, you've been in the Ukrainian government controlled territory. Are we speaking about the detained because of the conflict?
Also, yeah.
So there were like this 100 around people connected?
No, there are, of course, there is a mix of people, and there is a certain number of people detained due to the conflict. But we couldn't, also due to time frame and time schedule, we couldn't talk to hundreds. Or not even to 10. We have talked to several people directly.
And have you, what's happening to not just the places where the detained because of the conflict, but we have the prisons who are at that territory, and also the psychiatric facilities there. So what is their condition, and was there any demand or request from the Ukrainian government side to really do something, to get back these people?
Well, of course, the most important thing, despite any conditions you are mentioning, is the fact that people must have the possibility to go back home to their families, to be integrated again in their families. This is the most important issue, despite any conditions we are talking. I have had the possibility to visit a hospital, children's hospital. I have also been visiting an orphanage for disabled persons, mainly disabled, and children and orphanages. And the conditions there were, as far as I know, I have visited many countries, of course also in former Soviet Union, respective CIS countries. These centers correspond in a standard to all others also.
But have you ever a request from the Ukrainian government really to deal and to work and request the bringing back some people or control over the prisons and the psychiatric hospitals?
I have not had a special request. I am under the lead of OSCE. So it's me or it's OSCE setting the agenda. But of course it is clear that the delegates and the representatives of UA in the working group, that they are always requesting that there is a possibility to get these people back, or also to have access to detention center. And it was always and several times requested also and stated that ICRC must have access to all people, detainees due to the conflict. This has not been the case so far, but at least in UA, ICRC has visited hundreds of of detainees already, but to my understanding, not yet all. And on the other side, in Ordo and Orlo, this was not possible so far.
And when we're speaking about the prisoners still, we're speaking about the military or the civilians?
I'm not making any distinction.
So, but are there both, if you speak about
Yeah.
the...
Yeah, there are both.
There were also the issues with land mining. We know that there are more or less 7 different parts of the territory. It was possible, just as far as we know, at the 2 areas. What are the problems? What are the issues? Why it's not really happening faster?
Well, you know that mining, respectively demining, is a worldwide very difficult and tricky issue. Worldwide, there are between 50 and 100 millions of mines to be demined. And of course, here also there is a problem with mining in the contact line zone and more or less concentrated. There are, of course, thousands and thousands of hectares mined. And these zones have to be demined, and that will be, of course, a work for several years. I'm convinced that takes time, but because it's not always very easy to demine a certain area, especially if there is a river or there is wood and forest and so on. So therefore, this is a very important issue, mainly, of course, also along the contact line, respectively in the zone of the crossings. So there, this is one of the highest priorities, that demining is done, that a safe crossing is possible.
But what are current probably obstacles? What we know that it's not happening that fast. You know, like, is it like the issue of the excess? Who is dealing with that? How it's done?
Well, this is one of the major issues of the security group. I'm of course concerned with the consequences of this mining, because people has perhaps no access, or it is difficult perhaps to repair water pumping stations or water purification stations and so on. So therefore there are many obstacles, and of course you know that there's still the conflict is still ongoing. And then perhaps before we have a ceasefire respected permanently, starting demining is difficult. But there has been already several initiatives for demining. This has been done, and this is very positive and important. But finally, the main work will be done after, of course, the ceasefire.
But how this initiative works, you know, who is demining what? You know, which territory? Are they separately, you know, the Ukrainian military are demining its territory, and on their side, you know, like how we understand how it's done, how it's controlled?
Well, it depends, of course. In all situations, it's a bit different. But here, I imagine, and what I have seen so far, it is absolutely clear that the Ukrainian side has to demine the Ukrainian side of the territory, and Ordo and Orlo, they are or have to go in the future to demine their part of the territory. And on both sides, and the contact line is the contact line, and this is also the line where the responsibility for demining will be, so I suppose. And there is perhaps also a need for that the third party has an overlook and is looking into very precisely that the conditions are, the demining is done at a similar level or the same level on both sides.
Of course, the water supply is always an issue during the conflict. It's a serious, and there are always talk that probably there is a lack of water supply, especially in the areas which are the most damaged. But how critical is it, and what are real issues if we speak about the water supply?
In practically all humanitarian crises or catastrophes I have been working during decades, water was an issue. Whether there was too much, whether there was a lack, whether it was polluted. So therefore, also here it is absolutely clear. On one hand, we should absolutely avoid. And this is an appeal, and I'm launching to all parties in the conflict that they are not shelling anymore water supply systems, water pumping stations, or also the pipeline. This is the very first condition, of course, to respect it. Because the lack of water, you can imagine how difficult it is if you have to live for 3 days without water. It is an absolutely important issue also for health aspects.
Yeah, that's exactly what we know, but that's the issue. Are we really knowing about particular facilities which are currently, are not rebuilt, and people are in the urgent need, in the critical need elsewhere, in Lugansk region, in Donetsk?
Well, there are mainly it was Lugansk affected. For instance, the station of carbonate. We are discussing about carbonate supply system since more than 1 year, and several times there was interrupted, and people were without water, without drinking water for a couple of days or even weeks, or with a reduced quantity. This is very difficult, and we should avoid, of course, that. But there is a need that both sides are agreeing on the supply of water, because the water is pumped on the Ukraine side, the government-controlled area, and it is distributed mainly to a high percentage on the side of Ordo and Orlo, mainly Orlo. So therefore, both sides have to work together, and this is actually undergoing without now entering into details, but there must be an agreement be found that both sides agree on one hand not to shell, and on the other hand to provide water, and of course also that those who are consuming, they have also of course to pay for the water. This is of course also a fact.
But are there already cooperation in that?
There is a cooperation, there are progress is made, and I'm looking forward that a final solution will be found, I hope soon. And of course the main problem is of course to register during summertime, when time is very hot and days are very hot. Then of course the lack of water is the most critical issue. But during winter time, if there is not sufficient pressure, if there is not sufficient water, there is no heating perhaps in several buildings and several areas. So also there during winter time it is an issue, and therefore water has priority to be tackled and resolved.
And what are the issues with the humanitarian aid? Is it easy as possible currently to get access? Is it different in Donetsk region or in Luhansk region?
We have been discussing and struggling for a long time. You are certainly involved, and people know that. And this is discussed also in international meeting, that access to the victims mainly for UN organizations has been difficult for several times, for months, and also today it is not totally free, and access is not always very easy. On the other hand, ICRC has access in Ordo and in Orlo, and also UN has more and more access. They can, UNHCR, for instance, WHO, that means High Commission for Refugees, World Health Organization, and also others, they have now got access, and it is certainly possible to find also informal solutions and informal ways. So therefore, access has become a bit step by step better and better.
And how is it in particular in Luhansk? And also, what way have you been there?
Of course, yeah.
So what were your observations in particular about that? Because there are a bit more news coming from Donetsk, but less from Luhansk.
Well,
More
no, in Lugansk it is not more critical than in Donetsk. No, that's not the case. I have been also there in the hospital talking about the problem of people sick. That means TBC, HIV, AIDS also, and This is one of the important issues. We have visited the TB hospital also in Lugansk. We have been received there very open. We have received all information we wanted. We were discussing about possibility to provide assistance and support through UNICEF, through ICRC, through WHO, and these things are now undergoing step by step. Also there I can confirm there is an opening and access has become better.
Do you think the issue is a social payment? How big is that? And also there are complaints by the Ukrainian government that, like there is this kind of pension tourism and some people who shouldn't receive the money receive. At the same time, there are people who hasn't receiving the payments in the territories which are under separatist control for a while, and the border crossing is, the separation line crossing is...
This is really an important issue, you're right. We have been approached many times internationally by European Union, for many countries have approached me also. And of course we have been talking with IDPs on the spot. Being IDPs living now on the Ukraine controlled area and territory, but we have also talked to people living in Ordo and Orlo. And stopping the payment of the pensions or social benefits, this is a very critical issue. And I must say, due to the economic situation in Ordo and Orlo, actually many families really are dependent, and they are in a dramatical need of these payments. We have even heard that these pensioners, with their pension, they are the only bread giver of several families. There is mainly a problem, of course, for women-headed households. A woman with 2, 3, 4, 5 children, they cannot go to work. They are in a dramatical need of these payments. So therefore, it is also an appeal I'm launching that a solution must be found. For instance, those living in Ordo and Orlo, they are not receiving that actually. So therefore, they have to come to the government-controlled area, and this, of course, is provoking and creating new IDPs, and this cannot be the aim of the thing.
How about the situation that's on the separation line? How do you see it?
This is certainly the most critical zone, because there are somehow pockets, there are somehow so-called gray zones, and due to shelling, due to the conflict, due to lack of freedom of movement, these people, of course, are the most vulnerable. I, of course, underline, as I said, women-headed household, elderly people, handicapped people. They cannot move. They cannot come and go, not even to take their pensions. They are there, they are blocked, they are isolated. For them, the assistance from abroad, from outside, from everywhere, being from the eastern part or western part, for them, the assistance is the most important, the most needed.
Is the Ukrainian government trying to send the humanitarian aid, and where were the particular cases to that territories?
Well, there is, of course, a support. Of course, the government is supporting and assisting these people, but of course they are in any case in a very difficult situation.
If you're speaking about the sending humanitarian aid to that territory,
yeah,
to the territories not under the government control, were there any, and when was the last time when the government tried to, I don't know, bring some for the citizens which are staying not controlled territory?
There is now a system established by UN, by ICRC, by several NGOs, by the government, from European Union, from many countries bilaterally, but also from Russian Federation. Humanitarian goods are brought, are then distributed through different channels. So therefore, there is a permanent system functioning and the supply regularly coming. But it is always only an assistance covering the most important needs. But anyway, many needs are remaining for sheltering, for the water, for security, for freedom of movement. All these aspects cannot be easily covered.
We have a general feeling, and the OSCE reports also confirm that there is a military escalation within the last couple of months.
Yes.
So there are more shelling. How really, on what exactly it's influencing, if you speak about your particular job? Can it's really how it goes together? Can it be the influencing that it has an impact on the prisoner swap or on any other things? Because also there were some kind of talks that almost it's a stalemate, there is no progress, very little progress on the, the political part of the solution, also on the security issues.
Of course, if there is no security, many things are more difficult. Assistance, convoys or whatever, distribution of relief goods, all that is more difficult if there is shelling, repair of water supply systems, installation of new pipelines. It is much more difficult if there is a shelling. But humanitarian aid, my work, the exchange regarding the detainees, the missings or whatever, all that has to continue anyway. Of course, always under the reserve that security is an issue and has to be considered, but my work in any way has to continue.
In your particular group, with whom you are dealing from the both parties?
Yeah.
With whom are you dealing?
We have, there are 6 official delegates, 2 from Ukraine, 1 from Ordo, 1 from Orlo, and 2 from the Russian Federation.
And these are?
These are 6, and there are, and I'm the coordinator, and I'm there with my colleague, Patricia, and there are always also others, perhaps 5 persons more being in this working group, but officially, and those allowed to speak and to talk and to intervene. Formally, these are 6 persons.
And they are, are they names public or what we know about this particular? Because that's also the people we...
Well, I suppose it is made public. It is Irina Gerashenko, yes, and Viktor Medvedchuk.
And from the side of the Lugansk and Donetsk?
Well, these are from time to time changing a bit, but they are official nominated.
There is also one case of the particular Ukrainian prisoners, Vladimir Zhemchugov, who had been, besides he had been on the mine, so he doesn't have, he's amputated to both legs and also both limbs, and it's in a critical, because he can't see any longer. So what we know, this person is exactly on the critical physical condition. Are any talks on discussion of some kind of an urgent change or urgent help?
Yes, we have talked about, and we have talked about 7 individuals. We have talked about also to give priority to sick and to injured persons and detainees. We have talked about Zhemchugov also. The description you are making is perhaps not very, very up to date, but it is a case I very well know, but so far there was no result.
But when you meant it's not very up to date.
Yeah,
so
perhaps you have described his deficiencies and his handicaps. It's perhaps not the situation in detail. The medical doctors have to say how it is precisely.
And whom we should ask in that case? Who are the people to really...
You ask Irina Gerashenko.
Okay. So just to something that, because to be honest, it's always very hard to understand, because of course not everything should be explained, not everything is public in these talks. So people see really what I would say, like the Ukrainian audience, they have very less and less trust when they don't know the details. Even like sometimes it's probably not discussed enough. So if we speak about the next round of the talks, or maybe next and the several, so there would be meeting tomorrow. But what else? what particular things, like 1, 2, 3 numbers, which are the issues these days? Because what we know usually, and what the audience usually know, it's all about the elections, the political part of it.
Well, elections is certainly a part and an important issue for Ordo and Ollo, but this is discussed in the political working group with certainly consequences. Then security issues, as for instance, finding solution, peaceful solution. We talked about, and this is also publicly discussed, installation of security zones, for instance. But all these discussions are held in the security working group. Then the economic working group, they are mainly dealing also, of course, with the question of water, as I said, with gas supply. Now, in a couple of days, autumn is beginning, and soon, then winter is coming again, and cold days. So therefore, these issues are important. And in the humanitarian sector, of course, also here, we are looking forward for the next months regarding, on one hand, how to deal with the question of IDPs. There are more than 1 million of IDPs. How are they sheltered? How are they treated? Have they a job? What can be done? This is an important issue also, mainly for, of course, the Ukrainian government. And then also what has to be done, particularly for the winter time, and not to forget the refugees. There are hundreds of thousands of refugees in the Russian Federation on one hand, and in Belarus also. And also these people have to be assisted, they have to be supported, and this is an issue we are also going to discuss in the next weeks again, particularly this question of IDP.
But is it like really, why it's done within this particular process, which is so much about talks between 2 parties, like 3 parties or number of groups, but this kind of the IDP issue could be just dealt within the Ukrainian, with the Ukrainian government?
Well, many things, of course. IDPs in Ukraine, this is an issue for the Ukrainian government, this is clear. But of course, the Ukrainian government has also a certain responsibility for the 10,000s of refugees in Belarus, for instance. And they have also a certain responsibility for the hundreds of thousands of refugees in Russian Federation. It is clear. But how to deal and how to tackle, this is another issue. I'm very happy that there is a ministry for the Donbas with Minister Chenish. I know him very well, and he's certainly doing an excellent work, I have no doubt. We have worked together since the very beginning, but of course he also has his limitations. There are of course many limitations politically, financially, and whatever.
So what would be your indicators that, your meetings is not in vain, that it worked? What was it like the minimum we can reach at this level?
We can reach a lot. If there is a political will, we can reach a lot.
Okay. So, and probably what the last would be, there were recently the reports by the Human Rights Watch, by the Amnesty International about the tortures, about some particular war crimes. It's an old story. So what is the situation now? What are the burning issues? How do you see that?
I can refer to an information also given by Ukraine side that, for instance, torture has been reduced or stopped. And this is a very positive issue and a positive message. Well, nobody knows perhaps how far there are still torture from time to time. I hope this is not the case. And I can only launch an appeal again to all parties in the conflict. The torture or an inadequate treatment of a prisoner, of a detainee, or an IDP, or whatever, should not happen, should not take place. And I can only launch the appeal that in all these detention centers, these detainees are treated correctly and well, and in a human way.
Thank you.